Greetings, good people. Welcome to Who Knows, It's Just Life, the podcast. I'm your host, Kyle. Thank you for listening today. On today's episode, I am joined by my mom. My mom is originally from Smithfield, Rhode Island, and she went to University of Rhode Island for college, came down here with my dad to the Maryland area, and we're going to get into a lot more about her and her background and her life story, as I did in the episode with my dad. So I'll skip most of the formal introductions part since we'll kind of get into that organically. But welcome to the show, Mom.
Well, thank you. Good to be here.
All right. So I know, Mom, I think you've heard maybe an episode or two, but just to kind of say it at the beginning of the show, it's called Who Knows It's Just Life because it's literally just about life, and it's also acknowledging that I don't know, and I guess if we're all being honest, most of us don't really know, what to make of this journey as we're going through it. So it's just this podcast is just a learning experience. It's a public expression of that learning, and so I welcome you to challenge me about anything and just navigate through the learning with me, and we can give each other grace for all the things that we've been through, and just expressing that and learning through that here in this space. So I appreciate you joining me here, and I just wanted to say that at the beginning. So I always like to start off the show with just a check-in. So how are you doing today? How's your week going? How are you feeling?
I'm very well. The week has been interesting. I've had to get up early almost every day this week, and I'm retired now, so that's different. But I do want to say what you just said about your podcast in general. The key word that you used is journey. It is a journey, and it's always a learning experience, no matter how old.
Yeah.
So
that's a good point. I know Dad, the episode with Dad, he kind of ended with that as his main lesson. It's about the journey, not the destinations. And we're starting it off with that same thing. And I'm sure we'll hit on a couple of examples of that. So kind of like with the episode we did with Dad, we can just start with childhood and kind of go through life. We can, touch on things briefly if just to kind of speak to them, but if there's any particular stories that come to mind, feel free to share those. But yeah, so growing up in Smithfield, Rhode Island I guess we could say you grew up in the 60s.
I was born in 58, so What I remember is growing up in the 60s.
Right. All right, so let's start off with just you talking about your childhood.
Yeah, I think the place for me to start, though, is to talk about my parents and the influences that my mom had and my dad had on me. They were very different, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, about their cultural differences that impacted the way they saw the world. But my mom, she was very well read, but she was also very unassuming and humble. And I don't think a lot of people realize just how well read and how deeply held beliefs she had. She was a woman of faith, and it was the kind of faith I was raised Catholic. My dad was a reluctant Catholic. My mom was more, she was the one who really promoted our faith, and we even went to Catholic school. And but she came from the point of view of social justice, and there is that thread in the Catholic Church that I think is often overlooked or underestimated. She also loved games, and she was very competitive. And she liked to win just as much. She never let us win as kids or grandchildren, right?
I remember playing cards with her. She would say, if I said I'm winning, she said, no, you're just ahead.
Right, because it wasn't over yet. She loved games, as you know, because even as our yearly beach vacations, we would play hearts and well rummy. Into the night, and rummy, and she liked crossword, cube, Scrabble, all of that, and a game called Quiddler that we came to later. So, and one of my distinctive memories of her, though, is seeing her be a mom. The first three of us were born within 5.5 years of each other, and then and I was the third. Then my sister Jane was born, and I was 7, and it was a delightful experience for me to be old enough to appreciate a baby in the family, but just seeing how my mom was. She was gentle, she sang, I don't know. Those are really fond memories for me. Now, my dad was different than my mom, which is a good thing. But one of the things for him was he always emphasized that there was more than one side to a story or to anything in the newspaper or whatever. And this is a very sharp memory for me, is I came home from school very proud of the fact we used to eat dinner together every night and we'd talk about our day. And I was like, oh, I read in Scholastic News today that, in Russia, TVs cost $2,000 and, all this stuff about Russia. And my dad looks at me and goes, well, did they also say that they get health insurance, they get health care done for them, and they have less income disparity, and they,
and how old were you?
I was probably 9 or 10. Maybe I was 11-ish, no more than that. And he always would say, be mindful of who's writing what you're reading and why they're writing it. And that was huge. Now, both my parents were not college educated or anything like that, but you wouldn't know that by the interest they had in world events. They read a newspaper front to cover every day. My mom would do the crossword puzzle every day. So, but the funny thing I can tell you is a funny memory that I do have. Like I said, I went to Catholic school from grades 1 through 8. And at some point in religion class, both my mother's strong faith in Catholicism and social justice and my father having us question everything. I remember being in religion class at one point, and we always focused on the New Testament. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, Jesus was a communist, at least a socialist. Wow. And there you have it. This was the combination of my two parents' influence on me.
Yeah, that's not... I don't think there's a lot of evidence that he was a capitalist.
No, right?
But yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. So another thing I got from my dad too was the love of sports, and I used to, like I said, I was one of 4 girls growing up, but he did see that I had athletic ability. Okay. Also, I grew up before Title IX, so there were not organized girls' sports.
Title IX being the what law was that a part of? The was that in Nixon's administration?
Geez, I don't know.
That was the emphasis on providing not equal but
equal opportunity.
Funding for women's sports, girls' sports in schools and stuff like that, colleges.
So growing up, there was Little League for boys. There were all kinds of things, and I did not have those opportunities, but. In any case, my dad saw that I was athletic, and my dad played minor league baseball way before I was born, but, when he was a young man. And anyway, he missed playing catch, and he realized that I could throw a ball. He probably showed me, but I think I picked it up very quickly. It didn't happen with my other sisters. He tried, and he'd say, they throw like girls. So... he went and he took me out to Benny's, which was like a 5 and dime type store in Rhode Island, and we picked out a glove. I still have it. It's a little black glove. I was in 3rd grade, and we started playing catch and pepper and stuff like that. That was my first exposure to play a sport unorganized. I liked basketball too. I liked football.
You played basketball in high school, right?
I did, and softball.
And softball, okay. Like through like junior varsity, like all the way through?
For softball, yes. In basketball, I was new to the public high school, and I was really shy. That's something else I can talk about probably. That's the one thing for me growing up. It's not a trauma, I would say, but I had intense social anxiety about going to school. And it would start on a Sunday night. I'd start like throwing up. I'd have to throw up before I went to school, and that lasted at least through 4th grade.
Wow, yeah.
It got better, but it didn't go away, and it gradually got better. But it was something definitely my parents were concerned about. I was also painfully shy around my Italian American side because I was way younger. I was the youngest grandchild, and there were these tall, loud boy cousins in their teens that I just stayed next to my mother. So I do remember that for a time. And I know they were concerned about it. But at home, I didn't really show that side of me. I was totally fun prankster, really. I was the volatile
was
one
a
of the four
prankster,
girls.
okay.
Yeah, I was the volatile one of the four girls. Rode my bike everywhere, that kind of thing. But at school, I definitely was an anxious child. But
And so with basketball,
so I couldn't. Yeah. So sorry. Yeah. So freshman year of high school was my first year in a new school because I had gone to Catholic school for grades 1 through 8. And I was painfully shy to do so, even though my best friend from across the street always had gone to public school. This was new for us to be friends, where she already had a tight group of friends that I didn't know. So that transition was difficult, but not as bad as you would have thought for someone as socially anxious as I was, because I was growing out of it, but I was not ready to try out for any sports or anything. So then sophomore year, I tried out, and the coach did something opposite with me. She didn't make a cut list right away. She actually said, I definitely want you on the team, which was great.
and you were on that list.
So I was on the list to actually play, not the cut list. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, right away, like
good.
quickly. So I enjoyed playing JV. There was no pressure. So then the next year I did make the team for varsity, but that painful shyness, I don't want to be noticed thing impacted me. Kind of frustrated the coach a little bit. And then senior year, I just didn't want to play basketball. And we had a highly competitive basketball team that had a history of going to the state championships. So
Wow.
I was intimidated by that. I loved being part of the team, though. Loved the practices, loved the hard work. She was a great coach.
You like practice?
I did. I even liked running up and down the stairs on days where she just would make us run,
Wow.
So, yeah, my dad kind of gave me the sports thing, too.
That's cool. Going back to the throwing like a girl thing, with that saying that you're like, I'm just curious how he would have. He said if they threw like girls, like you threw like a boy, I guess.
He never said that, but I just knew I threw well.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
It reminds me of I think it was a MythBusters thing where they actually tested out like the whole throwing like a girl myth, and really it's basically if you're untrained, you throw like you're untrained, and if you learned how to throw, you can throw. And they show boys throwing with their non-dominant hand, an arm that they wouldn't have learned how to throw with, and they look like girls throwing with their dominant hand, but they've also never learned how to throw. But any girl or woman who's learned how to throw can throw just as well as anybody else. So it's like, it was
feel
very
like
interesting.
he tried with my sisters, but they might not have had the interest either. I just did. I don't know. But related to this though about girls, so like I said, my dad played professional baseball when he was a very, very good baseball player through high school. Actually started like in his middle school years on a Catholic youth team. But you know what? He had 4 girls, and I heard this so many times. Oh, poor Frankie. He only has girls. No sons. And I used to feel a little bad about that. But I do know I asked him, and he said, "No, it doesn't matter to me."
Well, that's good. So that came from external folks.
Yes.
He wasn't the one
never
saying
said that. And when at some point it really did bother me, I must have been a little older. I said, so-and-so said, again, I've heard this all my life, Dad. Oh, poor Frankie, no boys. I said, does that make you feel bad? He said, no.
That's good. Because I know that sometimes for some people that's said by their own parents, one or the other.
Yeah, no, he never said it. My mom never said it. My mom, we had so much fun with Mom.
That's good.
Yeah. Now, if you want to talk about my childhood, we can also talk about the world events that were happening.
Yes, let's go there.
Okay.
The 60s.
The 60s, one of my first vivid memories of anything happening in the world was John Kennedy being assassinated. Mm-hmm. I was about 5. I was 5, as a matter of fact. And it was a little scary. And I saw live on TV Jack Ruby kill Lee Harvey Oswald as he was being transported from some sort of detention or whatever. And we happened to have the TV on, and I was in the living room with my dad, and he jumped up and he said, "I don't believe that." And he goes, "Jan," my mom, Jan, you can't believe this. Look what just happened." And it was scary. There was a lot happening. I mean, I saw the funeral, and it was on TV. It was very somber. I was very taken with his daughter, Caroline Kennedy. She's a little older than me, and that was a scary time to think that a president could be killed like that. And then, secondly, the Vietnam War. As that unfolded, they would give body counts every night on the news. Like I said, my parents were very connected, and the news was always on. And I remember they would give how many Vietnamese were killed and how many U.S. soldiers were killed. And then, of course, years later, we find out the whole thing was like a hoax. Like they were just making up numbers. Then, of course, 1968.
Of course.
The month I would be turning 10. So I was in 4th grade. Martin Luther King was assassinated. And I grew up in a small town in Rhode Island that was all white. I was in an all-Catholic community, really, because I went to Catholic school at that point. And I was playing at my friends across the street, and we were downstairs in the basement. The TV was on. They broke in with the news, and I didn't know who he was. And I ran home, and I was, again, scared. Like, this was important enough for them to break in, and I was like, oh my gosh, what, who is this? And I can't really remember, other than my parents being very concerned about what happened. I don't remember what my questions were or what their answers were, but it slowly unfolded for me to understand. And then 2 months later, Bobby Kennedy gets assassinated, and he was at that point the front runner running for president.
On the Democratic ticket.
On the Democratic ticket, yeah. Because LBJ did not run.
Right.
And it was really, I can't even think of the word right now for what that felt like as a kid. But was that supposed to be normal? Because that's all I knew. I guess one thing I can add to that, though, is my awareness a little bit that was starting to happen was before Martin Luther King. I wonder if I just had, from hearing the news, I might have had some sort of sense of things happening with civil rights, although it didn't directly impact me. Living and growing up where I was, I remember seeing in the Scholastic book selection, and we didn't have a whole lot of money, we didn't get a whole lot of things, but I remember seeing a book about a runaway slave, Frederick Douglass. And I asked my mom if we could buy it, and she said, yeah. It was like 95 cents, I remember. It was kind of a big deal. I couldn't wait till I got it. I got it. We didn't get books that often. We went to the library, but we didn't buy books. And I read it. I read it again. I almost knew it, chapter by chapter, because I never had heard of slavery before.
And this was at what age?
I was in 3rd grade when I got that book. So here we are in 4th grade, Martin Luther King gets killed. And now I'm starting to backfill and figure out what's what. But frightening time. And then, hey, within a few years, Watergate happened.
Right.
So by the time I was like 16 years old, I think is when he resigned. So those are my formative years. Kind of major things that made us really question. Of course, I was primed for that by my dad, right?
Right. Wow. So yeah, that's just a lot of world events happening to you, but also, like you said, being primed for those things with just how your parents were, and the fact that, I mean, I'm sitting there thinking, wow, so your school didn't mention slavery at all, like up until 3rd grade. And I feel like maybe that's the age kids know about slavery. I don't even know when that's taught per se, but I mean Avery's 7 and he knows about it now, partly because of Hamilton, partly because of just, I don't know, maybe it's how I am as a dad or whatever.
Yeah, not formally through school.
Yeah, yet. So it's, well, they have mentioned, like, in they do, he came home from school one day talking about Ruby Bridges and stuff like that. So he's aware of, civil rights and some of that. But in terms of slavery, I don't know that they've covered that in school. But for you to identify that you wanted to get, for whatever reason, you picked Frederick Douglass's, book.
Because I didn't know what it was. I said something about a runaway slave. I'm like, what is that?
Yeah, and then for mom to for your mom, for my grandma to go ahead and buy it for you, and for you to just dive in as much as you did. That's interesting. Yeah.
I do know that my mom was very, very much impacted when my dad moved to the South to play baseball. He went down for the first season to play, and then he and my mom got married in January of 1952, and he went down for his second season. And getting off the train right away in Georgia, my mom was like, whoa. She, first of all, had never seen so many African Americans, but she saw firsthand what segregation was doing down in Georgia, and it was really jarring for her.
Yeah, I remember her telling stories about that, how, with I think I have some old recordings. I think I've recorded them telling some of those stories.
And so, like I said, I can't remember exactly what kind of conversations we had when Martin Luther King was assassinated. I can't remember exactly that week, but I imagine they had feelings about everything, and they were probably trying to answer my questions, but I can't remember the specifics.
Yeah.
I do know that if we're talking about history, again, Catholic school, I was in 6th grade. We had these nice new history books, and it was just the run-of-the-mill. History's very boring, but in the back of the book, they had these stories about African Americans. Marian Anderson, I read about her for the first time. I was like, wow, but that wasn't taught. That was just in the back of the book. I was always ruffling through books and whatnot. Louis Armstrong, Jesse Owens, people like that. They had these like little biographical.
At the end of the book.
At the end of the book, which we did not formally study, but I happened to find.
So it's in the book. It's just that's so weird to me. Okay, interesting. So I want to go back to something you started alluding to a minute ago about like traumas and stresses as a kid. I know one thing that I've started to learn about is traumas with respect to, racial trauma, patriarchal trauma, and realizing that that's something that could really be defining for children as they're learning the world and as they're growing up, whether that's directly in the home, a trauma they've experienced in the home, or just through life coming at them, how with it and life coming at them based on how they identify. So for you, are there any other traumas or stresses that come to mind for you?
Maybe not related to those things exactly, but I definitely worried about my parents' safety. If I heard a siren in the middle of the night, I'd be anxious, and I'd run downstairs and climb into bed and be sure they were okay. One of the reasons why I did not like going to school was because I wanted to be with my mom, but also if I heard a siren at school, I was afraid they were going to get her. And I never knew exactly where that came from, but that is what I was feeling. And I really intensely did not want to leave home, and I didn't want to leave my mom. Now, my dad was an anxious type person. He had low self-esteem. He kind of foisted that on us too. And he always told us that other people, there's always someone better than you.
Really?
Oh, yeah. And that had an impact on me for sure.
Wow.
But you know what? I found out about 10, 15 years ago. My Aunt Mary, who is a few years older than my dad, was telling us one time about the time that she and my dad were put in an orphanage. We're like, what? Their mom got sick, and she got taken out by an ambulance. And my dad was under 2 years old, and they were put in an orphanage. And I don't know for how long or whatever, but that spoke volumes to me. That probably explained a lot of my father's general sense of anxiety.
Yeah, for sure.
And I have since more recently learned how parents can transmit anxiety to children. More so, I was learning about that in the context of my students being recent immigrants themselves or their parents crossing the border, and what it takes to cross the border, and the anxiety and trauma that produces, and how that can be transmitted even to the kids born in this country.
Yeah, for sure.
And so when I heard that recently, I was like, wow, I wonder how, my father's fears seem to maybe somehow transmit down to me without a conversation about it. I really don't know. But I can tell you that that was sort of the source of my trauma, was worrying about something bad happening.
Yeah, and maybe and sometimes, so I think trauma, I think things like that, and I'm no expert in this, but what I've learned and what I've understood to this point is that things like that can be naturally, can be biologically passed down, but also may not be activated until they're actually triggered by something that actually happens in your life that brings that out more so. And maybe the experience with that Papa experienced as a 2-year-old brought out something that may have been lingering in his body and his body chemistry since his father came over from Italy. There were some traumas he experienced just in that immigrant transition that he went through.
I think it was his mom, to be honest with you. She was never happy to come. His dad was all for it. His dad came first and then signed up for World War One and proudly served the United States Army. He had already served in the Italian Army before that. He wanted to get away from Mussolini, and he, already they had 2 children, and she had to leave her mother, never saw her again. My grandmother, I grew up seeing a very unhappy Italian grandmother who never really learned English, just broken English, as we would say. And yeah, she didn't smile a lot. So I guess you're right. You know what? Her trauma of leaving home and her mother behind, and her mother was a widow, and probably transmitted to my dad. And then she was never 100% well. She was kind of got sick, sort of, with things that we never knew what it was.
Yeah.
Well, I know it was. I hate to use the word depression with it not being. I don't know if she was or not. She seemed to have physical ailments, though, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, in those days, I know that language wasn't really widely used or widely addressed.
Yeah, so I don't want to presuppose, but I think, and my dad's struggling right now. Yeah, I think with accepting being 89 and knowing his cognitive facilities are really decreasing and declining.
Yeah.
And he's aware, and it's painful to see.
Yeah. So you just mentioned your dad's Italian side, or your dad being Italian. Can you speak just in general about your cultural identities and how that played in? Because most people would look at you as a white woman, but you have, very strong cultural links to, each of your parents and where they're from.
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, my father is Italian American. His parents were born in Italy. 2 of his brothers were born in Italy. They were very much rooted in Italian culture. And yet I know that they initially lived in the Italian section of Providence, Rhode Island, which was Federal Hill. But by the time my father started school, they were living in what they would call the white part of.
Interesting.
Okay, so let's talk about identity for a second. Now, they never thought of themselves as Black American, but they knew they weren't white American. Why? They didn't speak the language, and the culture was so distinctly different, right?
Yeah.
So my dad ended up going to school in a more assimilated white school in Providence. Can't think of the name of the elementary school right now, but I think it's Vesey Street Elementary School in Providence. He didn't speak any English when he entered school, and so school was really an issue for him. And as you know, I chose as my second career to be an ESOL teacher, and it was very much rooted in knowing what his experience was, and he didn't have the supports that we now give students. But anyway, he always doubted himself as a student. He couldn't read very well. But he's really a very intelligent guy.
Yeah, for sure.
Very deep thinker and all that. And really good with problem solving and figuring out things. But anyway, for me growing up, what that meant was... I said he moved. He moved on to the same street that my mother was growing up on. And now my mother, her father was an Irish immigrant. He came by himself at 17. You had to have a sponsor. He had an uncle that was already living, I think, in New York. And he didn't know him or anything, but he just took that leap. He wanted to leave. He was working in mines, and it wasn't the healthiest thing. And he saved his money, and he came over. And he was saving money for his younger brother to come, which did not happen. His younger brother did die of like pneumonia or something, and their lungs were always compromised, including my grandfather's, even his older years. And my mother's mother was French Canadian, and they were very interesting, and I knew them very well. Okay, so my Irish grandfather's family wasn't with him, and he, along the way, met with my grandmother's, soon at some point to be his wife, her brothers, and he was friends with her brothers. And the French Canadians were great. It was a large family. They all worked in the textile mills, and at an early age. So
like pre-15 age, right?
Oh
like,
yeah, they were like 10. They could only
Yeah.
go to 5th grade, and then they had to work in the factories.
Right.
And my grandmother begged not to do that. They let her go to school a couple more years. I think she wanted to be a teacher or something. My grandmother was also, she read all the time. I mean, my mom knew that, and she worked too while she raised children. Okay, her mom had to work for them to have the house that they bought and stuff like that. So, but she loved reading. She loved learning. She was curious about the world, unassuming, humble, and deceivingly brilliant. Probably being a woman too is just, wasn't something that she could ever achieve more than what she did. But when we say achieve, what we're talking about. We're talking about like visible success in terms of money and jobs, but really she was very special.
Yeah.
But she would like sometimes be known to stay up till 1 or 2 in the morning because she couldn't put a book down and get up at 6 and go to work in a factory.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I do remember is her gnarled knuckles from. She worked in a textile mill, and her job was to inspect and pull out any of the threads that were irregular or correct them. Yeah.
Wow.
So you had to have a good eye for that, and also the dexterity for it. And like I said, I knew her in her older years, and her knuckles were like swollen with arthritis.
Wow.
But so anyway, that's what I came from. We every Sunday we went to my mom's parents' house, and her siblings would be there, their children, first cousins. It was fun. We didn't go to my Italian side as often. However, they had a distinctive mark. 2 of my father's siblings had moved out of Rhode Island, and whenever they were in town, we would gather. Like almost every night they were there. They would rotate from house to house. And it would be also coming over for dessert and coffee. That was a big Italian thing to do in the evening. So it wasn't like a big dinner every night, but it was, we would either go to another local aunt and uncle's house because they were going to be there, or they were coming to our house or whatever. And what I do remember is how loud the Italian side was. They always argued politics. It was a lot of Italian spoken, and it was very distinctly different. The Irish and French Canadian side laughed a lot more, it seemed. Broke out into song every now and again, and just crack each other up and harmonize or whatever. Just really different.
That's cool.
Yeah. But the other thing, though, to get back to what we talked about a little bit before, in terms of like a racial awareness, I told you that I read about Frederick Douglass. Martin Luther King died without me knowing the importance, but I immediately was grasping it. Just being the curious kid that I was finding those biographies of African Americans. And I met your dad when I was in high school, right? It was at the end of high school. And, so here's the thing. You asked me about growing up in that small little town of Smithfield, Rhode Island. It was all white. We had 1 black kid in my high school at one point. He wasn't in my class. And 1 Jewish kid. That's it. Right? Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was very aware of how that must have been for them. I didn't know the young man, he wasn't in my grade, and I just knew he was there in the high school. The other one was in my grade, and I sometimes...
The Jewish boy was in your grade?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I would talk to her sometimes, and she was sort of like...
Oh,
you
she
know,
was the Jewish person was a girl?
Yeah,
Okay.
yep. And she was really, it was tough. And it was tough for her. And I realized that I wasn't in the same way of thinking as the typical kid in Smithfield. I kind of felt, I grew out of my social anxiety. High school got to be more comfortable for me, but I didn't feel like I fit in so well. So anyway, I go on this trip. Senior year in high school, Project Close Up, to learn about your government more close up, right? It was incredible, by the way.
Yeah, y'all came to D.C., right?
Yeah, I took a bus down to D.C., and the whole state of Rhode Island was there together. And that's where I met your dad. And he was with the Newport contingent, right? And so we became friends. I became friends with a lot of people. Terry Monroe's another one. He was from Providence, and... So there were all kinds of a whole mix of kids. And when we got back, it was so hard to go back. I kind of knew I had just like, I didn't think like most kids that I went to high school with, and now I knew it. And then they also had a little like get together. We got back together, and Dad and I were like dancing together and stuff like that. And we talked about going to proms. I had no interest in going to my prom. Okay, that's the other thing about me, right?
Yeah.
And Dad was all about proms. He went to many proms. He was always going to proms. And
What?
yeah, because it's just a thing. And he had gone to his junior prom. I didn't, kind of thing. Well, the teacher who sponsored my trip to Project Close Up, and I can't even remember who from Smithfield went. There was maybe just 4 or 5 of us from my high school, if that, maybe 3 of us. But anyway, we got together, and then it was clear that maybe I was kind of hanging out with this black guy, your dad. And my teacher took it upon herself. We had a class, and it was like a democracy type class. It was senior year, so it wasn't like a regulated class, like it wasn't like a U.S. history. Yeah, not a required class. It was just like
an elective.
Yeah, an elective. And she thought she'd start a discussion. And she said, "So, what would you guys think if one of your classmates brought a black date to the prom?"
Wow.
I had no idea she was going to do this, right? The teacher. Mm-hmm. And I had to sit there. It was one of the few times I didn't say anything, because I usually was very opinionated at this point, right? Mm-hmm. And I had to listen. And I just remember this one girl. She was like a head cheerleader. She was probably on the prom committee. And I remember her saying, "That just wouldn't be fair to ruin our prom." I definitely remember someone saying that. And I knew who it is. I didn't want to say. And just other kids were just like shocked. I'm sure there were some kids who said, "It doesn't matter to me." But I don't remember hearing that. What I do remember is ruining the prom. Can you imagine? Yeah. I did go to Dad's prom, by the way, in Newport. Totally different experience. Nobody blinked an eye. Because there were other interracial couples. Now, remember, this is 1976. This is... 9 years after the Loving decision, the Supreme Court decision?
Yeah. Loving versus Virginia.
Yeah, in Virginia, yep. And so this is still kind of new territory at that point. But in Newport, it was totally like, fine. I didn't detect anything in Newport. But it was going to be a big deal if it was in my town.
Yeah. And yeah, I was going to say about Newport being still mostly white, but more diverse.
But it was a little bit more, it was more diverse than the town I grew up in.
Yeah.
But then, of course, Dad and I continued to see each other. We went to the same college, and that's when I really, on a first-hand basis, learned what, we didn't have the name for white privilege yet, but boy, did I experience what it, I knew what, I love that name. It fits it, right? I should say I love the name, but you know what I mean.
You like the description. You like the wording.
Yeah, because this was something I was experiencing for decades by the time we came up with that phrase.
Yeah.
But I knew exactly what it was. And white people just don't want to believe it. And I almost think you have to live it to know. But all of a sudden being followed in a store, definitely noticed that. Sometimes not being served in a restaurant, being denied our hotel reservation, or having trouble renting an apartment in 1980 here in Montgomery County, Maryland. So, but those are the big ones that I can remember. But there's always these small, seemingly small slights that Black folks are kind of used to and have like a tough exterior for, even though you hate it. Yeah. But white people are totally oblivious. I do remember when Kendra was born, the nurse that I had was so attentive. She was great. She was really helping me with, nursing Kendra. I had had a C-section, so, helping, And then Dad and you guys came to visit. She wouldn't even look at me after that.
Really?
She barely spoke to me. Yeah. A white nurse.
And that was in 94 in Maryland.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, it's not crazy, actually, but it's wow.
Yep.
Yeah, that's wow.
So, you guys growing up, we were in a like you guys refer to it as a bubble here in Montgomery County. You went to schools with an ethnically diverse environment, socioeconomically diverse. We had public housing. We have people who, live in $1 million houses, Black, white, whatever. You guys went to a high school with kids like, from all kinds of backgrounds. But still, along the way, that whole time when I so-called wasn't working and I was like volunteering and working on boundary committees whenever they opened a new school, or they had opened a new high school. Ooh, maybe we don't want to draw boundaries. Maybe we should try some new choice thing. The racial dynamic and socioeconomic dynamic that would play out over and over again, the perceptions, the misperceptions, the whatever. And I was so entrenched that people would always come talk to me, whether it was at the pool, like pool talk, or at the various sports that you guys were playing. People would want to come up to me and like talk about this, that, or the other thing. And I really was, I think, at the pulse of what families think about Black and white. It was quite a time.
So speak more about that. So what were they coming up to you and telling you? And I guess I know one of the things that did come out of this work that you did was the choice program that I had afforded to me when I was in 8th grade. I could choose between 3 high schools in the Northeast Consortium in Montgomery County. But so what were some of those things that you were being asked, it sounds like people are confiding in you or maybe venting to you about certain things?
Some families left. There was definitely a lot of white flight that happened even before that point.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. There literally one parent would say, I don't want my blonde, blue-eyed boys being a target at Paint Branch High School. Okay?
A target of what?
Yeah, like to know. I don't know. So they moved.
I know exactly who you're talking about. Too.
And we're not mentioning names here. It's just not. It's just pointless. But I would have Black parents come to me and want to know if this is further down the choice. Once choice was established and Kendra was getting of that age, so high school choice was now like 6-7 years in. Paint Branch kind of emerged as a more African American school. And
that's the school I went to.
Yes. And parents would say, will my kid be safe there? My African American son, who is a little nerdy or a musician and, whatever. So, I mean, it came from all sides, okay?
Wow.
And I would be constantly reassuring people that Paint Branch was the place to go. I was biased. I probably shouldn't have been, but I was. But originally...
So despite it being more Black than the others, it was still the place to go, obviously.
Well, yeah, but let me take a step back. When we first opened Blake High School, it was on the books, Sherwood High School was overcrowded too. Sherwood was in the more rural section of like Ashton, Maryland. And honestly, some parents were saying, I don't want my kids going to school with those kids.
So these are the Sherwood area
Yes.
folks.
And I'm like, who are those kids? You mean my kids? Really? Oh my gosh. No, so, I mean, you can look at like how awful it was in Boston, but there is a Montgomery County version of that.
Yeah.
Even in the 80s, 90s. This is now the 90s.
Yeah.
Right? So, we haven't talked about my career choices or whatever, but
We'll get back there.
we'll get back there. But I kind of thought I would have ended up like an academic. I'm so glad I didn't. I know I took a very unusual path that we will talk about later, but I'm glad I lived through that rather than have studied it and interviewed people for it. I think my experiences are much more profound.
Yeah, I think those experiences are really timeless and invaluable, and the fact that it's something about being a white person. White people are more honest with white people. Like I can think of certain stories you've told me about certain parents of kids I grew up with, and things that they've shared with you, the sentiments they shared about, like blackness or just whatever. Like their kids would never tell me that.
No.
And they may not agree either, but you just get to hear what people really think, and it's great. It's also great that the black black parents felt comfortable talking to you too. I mean, that just speaks to who you are as a person. But the fact that a lot of folks knew you were involved and were confiding in you in this way, you got a very honest view of how people were really feeling about the most critical things about. This is really what you were working on is community. Like people lived where they lived, sure, and Montgomery County, in this area of Montgomery County, was fairly diverse, but still people were sticking to certain fears and allowing certain fears to navigate and to guide where they sent their children to school, because that was the thing that they could control if they did, even if they didn't want to move. Some moved, like you said, and that's when you talk about Brown v. Board of Education. You talk about the in 1968 the housing discrimination, the act that barred housing discrimination. Those things are big laws that you read about in the history books, but this is 30 years later. Montgomery County, in a blue state of Maryland, human people are still grappling with, oh, well, I don't want my kid to go to school with those kids, or whatever.
They can intellectually agree with civil rights, but they don't want to take the chance.
Yeah, and to me that means
I'm saying that in air quotes.
Yeah,
a chance on what being around.
That means they don't really agree.
Right. So, yeah. It's so much. We could probably do another whole podcast on this, because there was a lot. I'd have to really think back and think of some of the many things that happened and were said throughout that time. But yeah, I do feel as though my work as a volunteer throughout this time, I think people did see me as being honest, and I had and they know I had a certain bias toward, trying to correct misconceptions. And
maybe that's your dad, that other side of the coin, that other side of the story.
Yeah. But I also became like the resident black expert with white people, which I hated. Like,
oh, you mean? Oh, wait. So what do you mean by that?
Like, okay, so some of my friends that were white, playgroup type friends, whatever, right? Oh, we're having a book drive, and I figure you probably have books with black kids in them. I'm like, why don't you have books with black kids in them to donate? This is how bad it is. On the one hand, because you're donating, you're looking because black people are poor, so hey, we need. But I'm thinking of all the levels of this that was so offensive.
Wait a minute, wait a minute. So they were looking for books to donate, and they were asking you for books with black kids in the books to donate.
Right. So assuming that most of the kids are going to be black because they're poor, right? And then secondly, I'm going to have a more diverse selection of books, which was kind of true, but our book selection at home was pretty diverse. But still, no, that's not the point. Right?
Oh my gosh.
That kind of thing. I can't tell you how many times things like that came
You
up.
never told, I never knew that.
Oh, yeah, well, it was constant, Kyle. I'd really have to dig back to really remember it all. I should have kept a diary at the time,
Yeah.
but life was moving so fast. You three kids were into all these different activities. I was doing all this other kind of stuff, and life was moving so fast.
Yeah.
But I should have kept a diary of all the things that I heard and was said.
And I'm glad that those conversations were happening, even though it was uncomfortable. Because I know one thing that exhausts the heck out of Black people is being the source of information, correction, and all these things, for white people. And a lot of black folk were like, there's books, okay? Like go read the books, talk to each other. Like white people created this whole thing anyway. So talk amongst yourselves and figure this out. So I'm glad that folks were at least asking you, even if the question, like that example, was a problematic question. But hopefully there were also examples of them just being inquisitive and hopefully learning and deconstructing their misconceptions or their assumptions. Hopefully there's examples of that too, because that's the work that I think needs to be done amongst white people, and hopefully that's happening, because black folk are tired of, and it's not our responsibility to have those conversations.
Yeah.
With folks. But anyway, so
I
that's
did.
interesting.
I did find along the way, people. I was a go-to person for a lot of different people, and when I was co-president of a PTA, like at Galway, for a time, it was great to have two, because I was not strong on procedures and knowing all the traditional PTA stuff, but I found what my role, and I wasn't sure I wanted to take that on, but people thought I would be a balance, and that turned out to be true. A lot of people approached me because they didn't see me as typical PTA to talk about things. Diverse people of different, not just ethnic and racial minorities, but just people who never felt part of a PTA per se, saw me as a little different than a typical PTA. And I really valued that time because I valued what they shared with me. Not so much that I could impart, but I felt like some sort of a conduit of trying to forge some sort of sense of understanding. And that I kept that with me as in middle school, things were changing. They were starting to require high school accreditation tests. Just a whole lot of things were changing at the county level that I was aware of, that I felt like the Black community was not. And so I worked with a friend of mine from Galway who was African American, and the principal was all for this. She was also African American, that we would have these other meetings, and it was outside the PTA of the middle school, but it was necessary, and it only lasted about a year and a half, because then the PTA got upset. But it was along those same lines of wanting to be sure that the Black community was getting the messages of all these changes happening. And I wanted to share what I knew, not just by chance, because by chance, I mean by at a swim meet or a soccer team or whatever, wherever I was, people would approach me when they start to hear about these changes. But I wasn't reaching everybody. I didn't have a way to be sure everyone heard this. And even though the PTA was officially the mouthpiece for it, if a lot of people don't go to PTA for many reasons, they don't go to PTA meetings, I wanted to create this other way. And there was at that point an active NAACP movement of trying to get an NAACP rep at each school and things like that. So that's what I was trying to tap into. But man, we ended up, having to disband it because the typical PTA got offended. Really? And they felt it was drawing people away from their PTA meetings. But honestly, there wasn't enough of a presence of all the kinds of families in a school going to PTA meetings for all the traditional reasons that we kind of know.
Interesting. So they weren't really so there was probably an inherent problem or bias in the way that the PTA was conducting itself.
Yeah,
that
it
made
looks like a club,
not inclusive
a clique.
of, right.
Exactly.
And so the NAACP thing was more appealing to some. Wow.
Yeah, and
rather than the PTA saying, why are we failing to reach folks,
Right.
certain folks,
they wanted to close down the alternative thing.
Right.
And then, like I said, it came from my experience at the elementary school level, knowing how people felt not comfortable or closed out of traditional PTA, and yet I know how critical information that I was getting. I became a cluster coordinator too, so I was hearing all kinds of new policy changes and this and that, and I wanted everybody to know what was down the road. And so, there's just so many interesting things. And then 10 years into choice, what do you think's happening? Those schools that started, we're talking about 3 high schools, Blake, Springbrook, and Paint Branch, started with somewhat evenly distributed racial groups, right?
Yeah. What about social economic? Were those pretty balanced too?
We were trying to, so we created base assignments to kind of have a somewhat of a stable base, but people could always opt to try to, to go to another
school,
choose a different school based on the school's specialty. So Paint Branch had like
science and media
with a medical careers type thing. Springbrook had the IB program, which was great. They already had it, and it was good.
Blake had arts and humanities, I believe.
Yeah, I think arts and humanities. Yeah, Blake,
yeah.
And the fine arts and all that. And of course, a good friend of mine who's Asian American said, "You know what? Asian folks are not going to choose Blake because they're not going to want their kids in the arts like that." And you know what? Over time, that bore out to be true.
Really?
Yes. But the disturbing thing was, for a time, Blake started to have a higher percentage of white kids, Paint Branch a higher percentage of black kids, and Springbrook a higher percentage of Hispanic kids. People started to choose along those lines. Kyle,
Interesting.
Right? So then, and I was a cluster coordinator, the county had this special group that was, these 2 facilitators that would do what they called study circles. And they wanted to do a study circle on race and the choice program. And I was at a preliminary meeting. And there's a Sherwood rep because a slice of what would have gone to Sherwood did go to Blake. Or they saw themselves as being Blake people. They wouldn't dare choose Springbrook or Paint Branch, right?
Yeah.
We were at a meeting. We were talking about what should be discussed at these. We were going to have staff. We were going to have parents. We were going to have students from all the 3 high schools participating. And maybe Sherwood, I don't know. And it was so interesting because we were all concerned about what was happening over time with choice. And we decided, well, Paint Branch has a higher percentage of suspensions. Do we want that information out there? Because that, And it was like, yeah. And you know why? Because Jeanette Dixon was so strong about it. Okay. And she also had a special program for kids with emotional stuff.
She did. That's true, right? Yeah.
And that kind of impacted her statistics. Do we want to have those conversations?
She was
or
a
not?
black woman, by the way.
Yes.
Principal of the Paint Branch.
And then there was also the question of SAT scores. And I'm like, well, wait. Look, Sherwood's SAT scores are no different than Paint Branch's. Anyway, and I said, and I, being me, this was a planning meeting, but we had a couple of county people there, and it was us coordinators. And I said, so going to a majority white school isn't all it's cracked up to be then. And there was like dead silence until the woman from the county who happened to be African American started to laugh. And then they all started to laugh because they didn't know how to take me. I'm very intense in these meetings, usually very opinionated and forthright, but that I meant it, and I meant it to lighten it up, but yeah, it almost didn't happen that way.
Yeah.
But they ended up, the coordinators weren't supposed to be in the study circle, but the 2 people who were facilitating, they privately told me, they emailed me to say, you have to be on that. And I'm not saying that because I'm okay. Because you know what? Honestly, it was an amazing experience because I knew what I knew. Like I had the institutional history of the foundation of why 10 years in. I was part of it 10 years ago. But I just mostly could just sit and listen. It turned out to be a large group because it had students and staff and parents, and just to listen to everybody. I'll never forget a Springbrook kid, a black kid, hearing about how some of the Blake kids were talking about it and saying how Paint Branch was a ghetto school in Springbrook. And this black kid said, I am so crushed. I had no idea people perceived my high school that way. I felt it was just, and everyone, it was quite the experience to go through that study circle about parents choosing and this and that,
Yeah. Wow.
Oh, wait. This is not about choice, but it's about perception and about white people talking to me. You know how Ms. Dixon loved having Panther of the Month?
Yeah.
And for folks out there, Panther of the Month was meant to be for any student that got nominated for anything, and a committee would approve it. It wouldn't be just for nothing, but it wasn't academic.
It was anything out of the ordinary.
Yeah, it was more about character or something that maybe you started a new group, like a new student group, student club, or something that you did, and it had to be that whoever nominated the kid had to be specific about it. So Troy's name was up there at one point.
My brother.
Yes, your brother. And honest to God, a Blake parent said to me, "Is that your son's name up there?" "Oh, I didn't think he was like one of those kids." I'm like, "What do you mean one of those kids?" She goes, "Well, she thought," I forget how she said it, "it was just a way for non-academic kids to get their name thrown up there. Like it was some sort of..."
What?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, I can't tell you all the things. It's just now coming back to me.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do another thing on that.
I know. And this is getting way too long. We didn't even talk. But I mean, so I guess to just go back to the original point, my experience as a white person growing up in a small white town, definitely my journey has taken me into. I don't even know how to say it, but I feel like I've had a first-hand view of parts of race in America through this weird lens. Obviously, I haven't suffered the way African American families have in terms of the wealth gap or in terms of like blatant discrimination, but I have I think a clearer view of things in my journey than most white people.
Yeah.
And white privilege is real, and it's the appropriate name for what it is.
So yeah, you kind of alluded to your time as a cluster coordinator in the late 90s, I guess mid to late 90s, but I guess we should kind of circle back and talk about your earlier career coming out of the University of Rhode Island. You and Dad moved, after you graduated from Rhode Island, you moved down to the Maryland area. And so just kind of take us through your early career and the choices you made, shortly thereafter or after that.
Well, in college, I originally wanted to major in education from the get-go, but they were closing schools at that point. It was a time where there were less students, and so I knew not to major in that. I majored in psychology. I thought I would become a psychologist. I thought I would make a career, and I thought it would be an educational or school psychologist. And I'm really glad I did not do that. Kind of for the reasons I just said. I think the experiences I ended up having through my volunteerism and just being an active member in my community and schools, I think I learned more that way. And then eventually I became a teacher, as you know. We'll get to that in a second. But so anyway, I majored in psychology. I did well. I was near the top of my class, and my professors thought I would just go right on into a master's and a PhD, and I didn't. So Dad and I got married right out of college. We moved down to Maryland, and it was really hard to find a job for me. Dad majored in engineering, and he had a job already. That's what made us come down. And I ended up working in a law library, right? And my experience with Project Close Up in high school, believe it or not, helped land me this job. It was crazy, but I should have had a minor in political science. I took a lot of history and political science courses as well. I graduated with more credits than I needed, kind of thing. Yeah, well, yeah. So
I think I did
that
too.
whole curiosity thing, right?
Yeah,
You got to take
yeah.
as much stuff as you can. So anyway, I had answered a blind ad to the Washington Post, and it turned out to be a legislative assistant in the law library of a big law firm downtown. And it so happened that the head librarian's husband had spoken to Project Close Up. He gave seminars to Project Close Up, so there was this weird connection there. So I got hired, and that was a fun job to have. And I was in charge. At that time, lobbying wasn't what it is today, so some of the partners and associates needed to just be kept abreast of what hearings were coming up and whatnot. And it was a fun job. I had a myriad of resources that had to do. I had to read the Wall Street Journal every day. Someone else in the library read the Post. Another one had the New York Times, and I had the Wall Street Journal. But anyway, but there were other things. The Federal Register, upcoming regulation reviews. There was something else I can't think of the name of, but would say all the hearings coming up. And so I would let partners and associates know, depending on their specialty, what was coming up. And then sometimes they wanted copies of bills, or they wanted to know who were going to be the witnesses at the hearings. And believe it or not, I could call people, and staff people would answer my questions. I can't believe that. This was the early 80s. Nowadays that wouldn't happen. But anyway, it was a fun job, and I liked working downtown. Was fun, and going out to lunch sometimes, in nice restaurants here and there, or just the camaraderie in the law library was great. Then I had you, and I worked part-time at that point, and I was working 3 days a week, and the daycare thing wasn't working out very well, by the way. And I just got to the point where it wasn't worth that. So then me and a friend who also worked in the law library, we both had kids at the same time, decided to try a basket business. That was
All
fun.
right. Wow.
Yeah. We actually got a write-up in the Washingtonian saying what a good value we were. But that wasn't going to be a huge thing that took off, just because it was too hard to do from home. But
And
it was
pre-social media,
yeah, it was
Imagine
what
what
fun.
social media could have done for
The
that.
the lawyers that we used to work for were our biggest clients, though. They were always needing to send gift baskets somewhere. So, but that was fun too. But then, as you know, I was home for years, but I was actively involved in things. And then, after Kendra started school full time, I decided to just get certified to be a substitute teacher. And I did that for 6 years. But I started to burn out from that. And I also had, through a friend, a job possibility that I got hired for was with an attorney, a solo practitioner who was arranging for surrogates. So people who could not have children on their own were trying to hire surrogates to have babies for them. And it was a little before it got really popular. And that was fascinating. I only did it for about 18 months. But man, the compelling stories. Again, my journey takes me many places. I grew a better appreciation of what it's like to be of lower socioeconomic status as well. Like, just so many obstacles. These young women who wanted to be surrogates, trying to get out of debt, or trying to pay off like student loans, if they even, or trying to save for college or whatever. And they had to have already had a kid because they had to have a record of a healthy pregnancy. But you know what? If you don't have money, guess what? You don't have bank accounts. You didn't have cell phone service. You had track phones. I don't know what it's like today exactly, but back then it was track phones you had to keep adding minutes
That
to.
was like about 15 years ago. That was like early
Yeah,
2000s.
yeah. About, yeah, in the mid 2000 somethings, like 2006,
Yeah.
2007. But there's so many obstacles for people who have just not enough money. And seeing that firsthand was hard too. But they had compelling circumstances. So did the couples who were desperate to have children. That was quite an intense 18 months. I did that a couple of days a week and still was substitute teaching, but I just needed to take a step back from subbing so much. And ironically, that's when I decided to go back to school and get my master's in education and be an ESOL teacher. And I was fortunate enough to be selected to be put in a program, and they actually paid for me to get my master's. And I went back to school at the age of 50. And I didn't really view it that way, but since then it's been brought to my attention that, wow, you did that at 50 years old. I didn't blink an eye toward going back to school. I really enjoyed the intellectual stimulation of it. But mind you, I was taking classes at night, but having to teach full time. I was granted emergency certification, so I started teaching, and it was a 2-year program. So I taught full time, went to classes at night, got all the lesson planning done and all the coursework done, and I somehow did that.
And that's interesting. You were emergency certified. That was because there was a shortage of teachers, like certified.
Yeah,
teachers
how about that?
And so 30 years earlier, when you were in college, you were like, oh, they're closing schools. And then
True.
30 years later, maybe it's just also the difference between Rhode Island in the 70s and the DC area in the 2000s. Things are definitely different. But.
Yeah. But that's just been a great experience. And I just recently retired, which I'll talk about in a minute. But along the way, I think I want to talk about feminism and the choices that I've made in my life. I am a feminist. And I say that with now, it's a very confusing term because people throw it around like nothing. And younger women don't really get it the way it was for when I was younger. And yet you look at the choices I made. I definitely stayed home for about 12, 13 years to raise you guys. And I don't regret that at all. I enjoyed it. And that was my choice to do it. But let's go back to when I was about 14. I want to say it was around, I want to say it was 1972, but I could check that. The first issue of Ms. magazine came out around that time. And Ms. being a new term, MS, for, hey, you don't need to know if I'm Miss, M-I-S-S, or Mrs., right? Just like Mr., you don't need to know if I'm married or not. And today, the young women that I've worked with as teachers, Ms. now means the same as Miss. Very few married women use Ms. And if you do, people think, oh, you must be divorced or you never married or whatever. It's crazy.
Wow.
But it's disturbing to me. I mean, some of us do use Ms. in the old sense of the word, like you just don't need to know my marital status. But people still will make a judgment.
Interesting.
And a lot of the young women that I know go from Ms. whatever and then will take their married name, which is fine, but then be Mrs. And they're so happy to be Mrs. And I'm like, wow. And yet everyone reaps a lot of the rewards of the tough feminist movements throughout the years, you know. And I'm referring really to the one from my lifetime, which was a recent feminism movement. But obviously it's been an ongoing struggle for centuries, but the whole time of life and patriarchal societies or whatever. And this is a small thing, I know, but to me it's symbolic of women today, I think, take a lot for granted, and I don't think they appreciate what people fought so hard for. Now, along those lines, though, I do know that some folks are going by mix, MX, and I would love to do that, but I don't want to misappropriate or whatever. I don't know what the word would be because I'm not a gender fluid person, But I also feel as though, like I always felt, you don't need to know my marital status. And hey, maybe you don't need to know how I identify gender-wise either.
Yeah. Nice.
And I would, in a minute, if I knew it was okay. I don't want to, like, assume that I can just use mix.
Yeah.
When I know so many people fought hard to be mixed for a different reason.
Right.
So, but I'm thinking along those lines.
So in terms of the feminism piece, what was it like making that decision to stay home, and what was the impression from your colleagues, and how was that for you to, I mean, like now you say you don't regret it. Was there any regret in the moment?
Well, I'll tell you, I assumed I would work and raise a family at the same time. I assumed it until I had to put you in daycare. I realized that wasn't for us as a family. It became clear to me that my choice was, my kids are too precious to me. Why am I giving them, why are they spending so much time with other people? So that was really where that choice comes from. So I did try to do the basket business, though, right? So I left my downtown job and the long commute and everything. And we kind of came up with, hey, let's try to do baskets out of our house. Okay, that's going to sound like fun. So I did find another babysitter for you to go to. And you would go for a couple of days a week just so I could try to get some things done outside of the house. You would be napping when I'd come get you. And then you would cry and carry on. And you were about 2.5 at this point. And this babysitter was like, she had a whole lot going on, by the way. She had a huge battle with a former abusive husband that she was hiding from and this and that. So she had a whole lot going on. But she babysat for a lot of kids. And she was very capable. But she thought there was something wrong why you would cry, and that's if he preferred her, because he was fine all day. What's this? No, you know what? You were mad at me. I realized that I think you were mad that I left you. I think you really wanted to be home. It's what it felt like. So Troy was born at that time, too. And so that was going on. So she had you, I had Troy. It kind of made sense that you had a couple days a week you went somewhere, but that just ended. I just forget it. And we let the basket business go, and 2 kids was just enough.
And it doesn't sound like you had any reservations or regret about that, even in the
not until retirement. And I don't have I don't have a lifetime of earnings. No, but no.
Sorry.
No, it's all working out. It's okay. No, but seriously, that just did not seem a compelling reason to have to work because I'm supposed to work outside the home.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed the pace of life and the change that happened when I stayed home all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting hearing you speak about that, and then thinking back to how your maternal grandparents, your grandmother worked at a little, like most of that generation worked at 10 years old. She maybe started working at 12, but the fact that immigrant experience in the Northeast necessitated children working, and of course, wives probably were, wives were working too.
And she did continue to work.
Worked probably from 12.
Do you know how they managed it? Her work, they would bring the kids to her mother's, my meme, out in Burrillville, Rhode Island, and leave them there for the week.
The whole week?
Yep.
Wow.
And then when they're school age, they had to walk to school and come home.
Yeah.
But the younger ones, as any other younger ones, there was the weekly trek on a Sunday night to drop them off and then pick them up on a Friday night.
Wow. And that's one thing I think is a little bit lost in how the feminism that most people think about is like, oh, women should have the right to work. It's like women have been working in very many contexts. Black women have been working, obviously, for the entirety of this country's history, but immigrant families, that's almost always the case, depending on the circumstances and whatnot. And so the idea that like we want to work, it's like, okay, I think what we mean to say is women should have the opportunity to work and have the opportunity to do anything professionally that they would like to do, and they should be paid equally, and all that kind of stuff. All of that stuff should be, there should be no glass ceilings. All of that stuff should be available, but the most important thing is the choice. You should be able to choose whatever's right for you and your family. Like, and that could be for a man or a woman. It shouldn't really matter. If a woman's making, enough money to provide for the family, like, the husband could stay home or whatever. And so I think it's cool to see how in your life you worked in various different capacities. You worked pre-kids, and then you worked a little bit, with kids first in the basket business, then with, subbing, and then that kind of rolled into a new career, separated by over a decade, which is it's just a kind of a cool way to do it. But that's all built upon just choices. And just the ability to
and I was very privileged to have that choice. Dad and I did make, some friends of mine didn't see how we could do that on that one income.
Yeah. And
I know Dad was college educated. Engineers, as you know, kind of get tapped out. He was just making what he was making. And those dollar terms, in the mid 80s, no, by the time Troy was born, it was 89. He was making under 60,000. We didn't blink an eye toward that. So we never took vacations other than the week in Rhode Island at the beach that my parents actually paid for the rental for. We didn't have money for vacations, and we just didn't have extra money, but we didn't even think twice about it. But what we did have is we had bought the townhouse before you were born, and then bought the house that I'm still in now back in 91. And, modest house, used cars for the most part, an occasional new minivan here and there. But we were able to leverage the house, though, when we got backed up, because we did.
Yeah.
We had you guys in any interest that you had, we signed you up for, whatever, and did. And when things got too much, we could just kind of consolidate. And that was very much through, it wasn't even, we didn't even blink an eye toward that. We didn't ever say, oh, we never go anywhere. We don't, and it wasn't like that.
Yeah. Well, I know there's so much more to get into. Is there anything else that you wanted to share? One of the things I kind of wanted to close with is just, if there's any life lessons or any major things, major takeaways that you'd like to just share in terms of just your life experience thus far?
The major takeaways are going to go back to my parents. I think the foundation that I had about kind of wanting to believe in humanity, my mom had a faith in humanity despite everything. My father always used to say, man's inhumanity to man. And yet at the same time, my mom believed in the good works in social justice. And for her, being a Christian or being Christ-like was that, and I did grow and know certain nuns that did that kind of thing, right? So I had those two things. I think those things just rang through and true for me over all these years and have been my guideposts. And it's made me, having to see multiple sides of one issue, that kind of thing that my father really fostered in us, makes me both kind of a pain because even like in my job, and when I did become a teacher and I'd be in a staff meeting and I'd always want to look at the other side of something just to explore it. And principals and people like that don't want that. You're just supposed to be yes people. And you come across, like right now, a really terribly limiting curriculum. It's okay. COVID complicated things. I ended up retiring a little sooner than I meant to, but the lack of stress of having to fight some of these fights over and over again. I don't know what my next adventure is going to be. I'm really kind of chilling right now in my early retirement here. But I know I have a lot of passion for people and for justice, equity, whatever, you know. And I don't know where that's going to go. I know I still have a lot of intellectual curiosity. But I think those early life lessons are what still guide me today in all its different forms. I think that's what wanted me to fight the good fight along the way, whether it was the high school choice stuff or, I don't know, anything like that.
Yeah. And I definitely think that you deserve the break. You deserve to just relax for as long as you'd like to. And I know your inner nerd and activist and all of the things that keep your engines running will bring you to the next chapter in the right timing. And yeah.
You know, I don't see myself as an activist in that way where it's a publicly acknowledged thing. But what I do want to do is use my skill set or my, what I've learned and just make a difference. I like for just a family or just, some kind of way like that in a small way, but in not small way. Just, yeah.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I don't know.
Yeah, it does. It does. That's a beautiful
but
thing.
I miss my children, the students already, of course, right away. And I feel like beyond any kind of curricula, all the curricula that we had that is limiting or whatever, I would hope that I've along the way inspired some kids to just believe in themselves, believe in the good, and I don't know, and that kind of thing. And now I've shifted to think I should find some volunteerism for recent immigrant families in general, like the parents, and maybe find some sort of support role there.
Yeah, tutoring or even not even academically or
yeah. I would. Yeah, tutoring would be great for kids on a Saturday. Meet me at the library or something, or even parents like conversational English. I'm limited because I'm not fluent in Spanish. It's amazing how much came back to me though, just words and stuff, and I can haltingly say a few things to bridge a gap here and there, but I cannot think in Spanish.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I really appreciate you joining me on the show. I don't think this needs to be the last time. I definitely think we should do this again. There's so much more to delve into. And I guess one thing I just want to say is that I love you and I appreciate everything about how I grew up. And I realized how privileged I was being raised by you and Dad and in the trauma-free, supportive, safe environment that I was raised in, and really everything I've been able to do and accomplish it was built on that foundation, and I really appreciate that. And I think the fact that myself and my other two siblings are out in the world independently, successfully in their own ways, doing their thing as productive adults and whole healthy adults is really a testament to you and Dad and what you all were able to do. So
I appreciate your words. It's humbling to be a parent, as you know. All three of you were different. Tried to give you what you needed and then, second guess yourself. But just remember, and you're a parent now.
Yep.
Whatever they're doing right now, it takes time to get them over certain challenges, okay? But give them what they need when they need it.
Yeah.
It's really hard. We didn't even talk about parenting so much, but it's tough. It's humbling. I know.
No, for sure. I definitely that could be another entire episode. Just
there you go.
talking about parenting, because I was. It's very interesting to think about you and Dad at my age now, because I'm mid-30s, and it's just like, oh man.
Yeah, I had Kendra. I was 35. Had just turned 36 when I had Kendra, so I had the three of you guys, and each one of you were different, and it was really interesting raising.
Wait, you had me at the same age I had Avery?
Yeah, which was the same age my mom had me.
I feel like we figured that out a while back, but
of course I was my mom's third.
Right. So but I was your first, and he's my only. So that's funny. But no, we should definitely do something about raising kids and all that. I think that'd be another fun one to do. But yeah, but I just appreciate the time, and I at the end of episodes I usually talk about a song that I like, and but with guests actually first, with guests, if you could have a superpower, what would it be?
Ooh, okay, here's a word. I don't know if it's a superpower. I know kindness is out there. And to me, I think generosity even is maybe kindness is one piece of generosity. Maybe it's the other way around. But spreading the idea, just spreading, having people be more generous in the way they treat everyone. Now, generosity has kind of come to mean like giving money kind of thing, but it's so much more than that. It's something that we choose every day. Am I generous in allowing someone having a different perspective on things? Am I generous about, hey, you can go ahead of me in line? There's just so many aspects to being a generous person, and it's being not competitive. We're all going to struggle, but can you imagine if we were kind or generous with each other as we go through the struggles, how much smoother that would be, rather than this competitive edge that we live with? So if I had a superpower, I think I would try to eliminate the competitiveness by spreading and encouraging people to choose generosity in its many forms.
Wow. That's a very... I don't think that's a superpower, but you made it one.
Okay, sorry.
No.
Wait, you know what?
We're going to count it because that's a beautiful idea, and most people think of superpowers as a selfish action or ability.
Maybe it is being selfish.
That they may or may not use for other people. Yours is purely rooted in improving the world.
Maybe my mom's channeling me right now. I don't know.
And that's fine. We'll allow it. That is a superpower. That is absolutely a superpower, because the world definitely needs that. Most superheroes are predicated on some individual feats that allegedly impact society and help society, but that's literally the core of what society needs. I think that's probably the most...
Well, we live in a culture that's very competitive and edgy, and I think that's what I'm saying. It would take a superpower to try to smooth that out.
I agree.
Edge that out.
That's a great point. Wow, that's probably the best answer I've heard. Okay, so what else do I have here? Okay, so what is either the last book you read or a book you've read recently that you recommend?
Okay, now you recommended the book I just finished this week.
Yeah.
Have you already spoken about Harry Belafonte's
My Song?
My
No,
Song.
I don't think I have, but I do love that book, and I'm so happy you read it.
Amazing. I'm so glad you gave it to me.
You love memoirs. I know you love memoirs.
I do. And you know why I love memoirs is this is probably one of the best examples of it, is I love having a person's perceptions of life living through big chunks of history.
Yeah.
And
you've done that in a sense in terms of in this show you've talked about how you at 5 and 10 years old saw the killing, the assassinations of the two Kennedys and Dr. King and everything. So
yeah, well, Harry Belafonte had a front row seat to the civil rights movement, working directly and closely with Martin Luther King in a way I did not realize.
Yep. And SNCC. He was on both sides of like opposing.
Yes. But just his experiences in general. He was born in the 1920s and amazing. So yes, I love memoirs and I recommend any memoir really. But that one is very poignant and I just finished it 2 days ago. I am about to start a new one that my sister recommended. It's called 9 Continents and it's a woman's autobiography or a woman's memoir. And she's from China. So I'm very curious about that. I don't know much about it yet. So,
cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. And I guess I read the first maybe quarter of Stamped, the middle school version. I know. So Ibram X. Kendi wrote Stamped from the beginning, which was just a book about racism and the history of racism worldwide, really in America, United States. And I know he worked with Jason Reynolds to kind of adapt that text for different age groups. And so you let me borrow the middle school one. So I've it's pretty interesting to read that. I never actually read Stamped, the adult version, but I can see what he's trying to do.
And it really needs to, the kids need to know this. And maybe the style of writing or whatever, it could be different, but the content is so important. And yet, in the news right now, they're
trying to strip away
any kind of like, they call it critical racism or something like that. They're talking about a curriculum called, I'm just like, and I know someone's gotten a hold of this Jason Reynolds book and are frightened by it, but it's something that all kids need to know is the falsity of racial differences, like how we've used race to abuse a whole population of people.
Yeah, and I think the big issue, we started talking about this yesterday, and what's great about memoirs is you see life is about, as you mentioned in the beginning, life is about the journey. And what we mean by that, what I think we mean by that is it's a story. And, you know, if you summarize somebody's life with like the end, you know, it's like, that's boring. But how they got there, all the lessons they learned, all the relationships they had, that's really what makes life fulfilling. And a song, you know, a book like my song, Harry Belafonte, or any memoir, or even just sharing like this on the show, you know, it's adding the human touch to whatever's going on in the world around us. And when you zoom that out and you think about that at a macro level in terms of the country tells itself a story that's just very exclusive and very inaccurate, frankly. And that's really the crux of the problem. And so, you know, the idea that we need to delve into the honest truths of, you know, Harry Belafonte's story, your story, my story, or any person who's lived in this country and endured, you know, any of the parts of the story that aren't consistent with the narrative that the United States tries to purport, you know, that's all part of it, and that's all real and valid. And until we're able to honestly absorb and appreciate those stories, we'll struggle as a country, I think.
It's true.
So the last question is, what song are you rocking to right now?
Okay. I like all kinds of music. I don't understand music, can't read it, don't know how it all comes together. Totally ignorant in that respect. But I can pretty much click through different radio stations and appreciate many kinds of music. At the moment, though, you know, I'm on an exercise bike every day, and I have like a playlist and whatever, but I recently remembered from the Gene Harris collection, the piano player Gene Harris, the jazz pianist, his version of Down Home Blues.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. I love that. And I guess that's his daughter singing, Nikki Harris.
Nikki Harris. I think we looked that up, yeah.
And we're presuming it's his daughter, or do we know that for fact?
I think it is, yeah. I think
unbelievable. I love that. But it's hard to pick a song. But right now, that's what I'm rocking to.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Yeah. And that's definitely a good song to exercise to. I could see that.
Oh, yeah.
Uptown South is probably my favorite.
Oh, I love that one, too.
Uptown South is my favorite.
That's one also Gene Harris. That's on my playlist, too. And I just pedal a lot harder when those songs are on.
Definitely. Cool. Well, again, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it. We'll definitely try to do this again. For those listening, I appreciate you spending some time with me today, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have any questions or thoughts on this particular episode or past episodes, you can get at me on Instagram at RealDadult. That's RealDadult. Also, you can let me know about any future episodes, any topics you'd like to hear about, or any guests you'd like me to have on. Yeah, I appreciate the time, and hope to catch you here next time. Until then, be safe, be well, peace.